the Family Ties project. The title of this presentation is Internal Migration and Ties to Non-Resident Family. And for those of you who attended the International Conference on Population Geographies, you will see some overlap there. I have added a few new parts and I deleted some of that presentation, but I wasn't able to make a completely new one. So I hope you bear with me that you might see something for the second time. But if your memory is as bad as mine, you will have forgotten about it all. So that would really help. Internal migration and ties to non-resident family. An overview of my talk. First of all, I would like to say something about the role of family migration and staying in terms of concepts, ideas, theory. Then I will present in a nutshell some findings from the Family Ties project. I will talk about future research that is either planned or that I hope that I can do sometimes or that others may want to do. And in that part, I will also say a few words on my plans to extend the research from family only to peers, and which is classmates and colleagues. And then I will talk about methodological opportunities and challenges, mostly in terms of data. And I will pay some specific attention to the situation of the UK. So first, concepts, ideas, and theories. And I would like to start by mentioning the metaphor of anchors and beacons. A Spanish colleague who worked in the Family Ties project introduced these metaphors, and I like it a lot because an anchor is clearly something that keeps you where you are, and a beacon is something that you can navigate towards. And that's the whole, that's a lot of the the content of the Family Ties idea, that family acts as an anchor if they live close by, and they may act as a beacon if they live far away. So how would you theorize then about these anchors and beacon effect? Well, the first way is just to extend existing cost-benefit approaches to migration. So that is close to economic views of migration, but I would always take it a little broader than that. So if you remember that Sjaastad in 1962 sort of introduced this idea of costs and benefit to migration, and he mentioned non-monetary, or what he called psychic costs and benefits, as something that is important in the sense that it affects migration, but he said that you should not even try to measure psychic costs and benefits, whereas I think it's really important to try to measure costs and benefits. By the way, everything I'm saying is about internal migration, because that is the topic of the Family Ties project. So if you then look at the anchor and beacon metaphors, family that lives close by would then be an anchor, and severing the ties to that family by moving away is a cost of moving. You could consider it a cost of moving in Sjaastad's term. But if you look at different literature, the social capital literature, social resource literature, you could also just argue that family living nearby is a social resource, or is a form of provides a form of social capital, and that it's therefore a benefit of staying. The beacon metaphor is then for family living away, and then family living away could attract migration in the sense that strengthening the ties with family living away could be a benefit of moving towards that family. And a family living away could also be a social resource or provide social capital. And in that sense, it would, in the beacon situation, there would be a benefit of moving. Another theoretical concept that I tend to use is the linked lives concept, which comes from the life course approach, and which has been introduced into migration research by Rory Coulter and colleagues. And the linked lives concept or the linked lives idea stresses the fundamental role of family, which is different from the roles of friends and other acquaintances, in the sense that family is a lifetime, it's given, you cannot choose your family, so the relationships with family are long-term. Or if it's partners who you can also regard as family, the relationship is characterized by commitment to the partner. So you can see family members as significant others. The term significant others is, as far as I know, usually meant to mean a partner, but I guess you can also use it for family members as important people in people's lives. Family solidarity is another concept that has been used. It was introduced by Benton somewhere in the 1990s. And one of the characteristics of family solidarity compared with solidarity with other people is that there's less of an expectation of reciprocity, or at least the reciprocity to the extent that it exists is delayed. You can sort of pay back what your family members have given you decades later. So how do those linked lives become apparent in people's life courses? Well, by means of support, emotional support, instrumental support, financial support, by means of decision making. Family members make decisions about each other's lives, even to the extent that they might decide about medical treatment or prolongation of medical treatment. So decision making, family members are really involved in decision making about each other. Family members also make joint decisions. Parents might be involved in the moving or migration decisions of children, for example. Socialization is also something that mainly takes place in the family, and family members tend to follow each other's examples more than they follow examples of other people. And family members give each other advice, which can also, in the end, lead to certain types of decision making. Linked lives also become apparent in obligations. So in several countries, there are legal obligations to take care of family members. And I mentioned Germany here because, unlike in the Netherlands, not only have parents legal obligations to take care of children, but children also have legal obligations to take care of parents. And if it's not legal, it is there's a normative association, in the sense that you are supposed, the norm is that you take care of your parents or your children, parental obligations and filial obligations. So now the Family Ties Project. The topic of the Family Ties Project is the role of family ties in internal migration, immobility, and individual labor market outcomes. And the Family Ties Project is way on its way. It was supposed to end the 1st of September this year, but we have gotten a COVID-related extension. So lots of the research have already been conducted. And the countries for which we've done research are the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the UK, the United States, Germany, and Spain. Not all in the same amount, so there's one article about Germany, for example, one about the UK, and many more about the Netherlands and Sweden, only one about Denmark. So the research is sort of spread over those countries, but not all in the same extent. So the Family Ties project is about ties to family, but in the project we do not really measure ties in the sense of support or contact, although we have done some of that in UK and Germany studies, but it's mostly approximated by the location of family. So family living close by is seen as a tie to family in the location of residence, and family living far away is a distant family tie. The funding was provided by an ERC advanced grant. I already said something about the duration, and if you want to see more of the Family Ties project, you can go to the website. Now, a very brief summary of some of the findings of the Family Ties project. So let's first look at family as an anchor. And this is in fact the part where there was already some research. For example, some work that I had done earlier together with Gunnar Malmberg and Emma Lundholm for Sweden, where we saw that the likelihood of migrating was much smaller for people who lived close to family than for people who did not live close to family. Also, if we only looked at those who had moved, so family lived close by. I think someone has their microphone on because I hear some noise. So I hope that is settled now. We already had some studies on how living close to family is associated with lower migration propensities, but we did a lot more in the Family Ties project, and every time we looked at this, the conclusion was that yes, family close by deters migration and drives immobility. This is only partly explained by providing or receiving support and being in contact with the family members. One interesting study looked at how family ties also work over more than one generation. There's some research going on that shows that indeed if not only parents but also grandparents were born in the same region, that is even more a keep factor, an anchor effect than if it's just one generation. We found that parents are important anchors, but also non-resident children and siblings too. And a specific study was about union formation, where we looked at prospective partners who lived far away from each other, and then we found that men's non-resident family mainly kept the men where they were, whereas women's resident children kept women where they were. So there were some gender differences here. So the other part, family as a beacon, again, yes, the family does serve as a beacon for migration. And that is true both for young people who move towards parents, for example, but also for older people. It is true for parents, for children. It's true for siblings who act as beacons for migration. And we particularly find this in times of adversity and particular life events, for example, divorce or health problems, although health problems do not always lead to moving towards family. in a very recent study, I did not find that much of a health effect of moving towards family. And one finding that I keep seeing again and again is that people's own life events or adversity are much more influential to migration than the other person's life events or adversity, even in old age. There's only one exception. If people have grandchildren and would like to participate in the care for those children, then it's more likely that the older generation moves towards the younger. So you could say that the younger generation's need for help with childcare leads to migration of the other party. But if you see care for grandchildren or being in contact with grandchildren as something that is really positive and something that contributes to the well-being of the grandparents, it's not that much of an exception, because it's, again, for their own interest that these grandparents move. If you then look at findings for family motives, so that was a particular feature of the Family Ties project, in which we looked at what people say about why they move, because when you only look at moves in the direction of someone or moves away from someone, you don't really know whether being close to that person is really a reason for a move or a reason for staying. So we were really also curious as to whether whether motives for migration provide any evidence that it's not just a coincidence that people move towards family or stay close to family, but it's really a motivation. And again, the answer was yes. Closeness to family is quite a common motive for moving and migration. We have looked mainly at motives for moving, and we have also tried to look at motives for staying. That's more difficult, I must say, because it's difficult for people to say why they stay. And it's not often asked in surveys. But we have some qualitative work, and if you ask people why have you stayed in this area for so long, they will tell about not wanting to move away from family members. And if you look at motives for moving, and you look at the actual changes in location, we saw that about half of those moving close to family mentioned being close to family as a motive for moving. And the ones who were particularly likely to mention moving towards family as a motive were women more than men, students more than people in the labor market, for example, retired people, widowed people, and divorced, although the evidence was not that strong. Another thing we saw was that moving away from family was rarely mentioned as a motive. And that was interesting because when I explain the rationale of the Family Ties project, I very frequently would get the question, yeah, you're talking about moving towards family all the time and about family keeping you somewhere, but aren't there many people who just who want to move away from family? If you look at the motivation reports that respondents give, this is very, very rare. Now, of course, there could be several reasons for this. It could be that this just doesn't happen a lot, and I think that is part of the explanation. It could also be that people shy away from mentioning they wanted to move away from family because it's a really negative reason and they don't want to see themselves as moving away from family. We did get several we did see several answers of people who wanted to move away from an ex-partner. So like, I didn't want to live near my ex-husband, for example, but not really, I wanted to move away from parents or similar. So we were talking about motives, and this is a picture that comes from work for the UK using the BHPS, and this is proportion or mentioning certain motives of those who move certain distances. So it starts at 20 kilometers here, and if you look at the distance, then the longer the distance of the move, the more likely this green one is mentioned, which is employment, which is what you would expect. The more likely it is that education is mentioned as a motive for moving. And what you also would expect is that housing would be mentioned less and less frequently with increasing distance, and that's also what we see. But interestingly, a family, if you look at family as a motive for moving, this is 20%, around 20% over all distances. So indeed, the motive moving for family is mentioned quite a lot. Then findings about the labor market outcomes of migration, and there we had mixed findings, because we found that if people migrate motivated by family, the outcomes in terms of income and in terms of quality of the job, as people describe it, are usually worse than moves for other reasons. So we interpret that as if you move to be close to family, you might sacrifice in your labor market career. But at the same time, if we looked at unemployed people specifically and looked at their moves, those who said they moved to be close to family were more likely to become employed after the move. So for those people, family apparently was a social resource or a source of social capital. So that was in a nutshell some findings of the Family Ties project. If you want to know more, look at the Family Ties website. And now future research, the third topic of the talk. So there's some research that we're still working on within the Family Ties project. I will present a few ideas for more work on family ties and migration, and some plans or ideas for work on the role of peers in migration. So within the project, we are still working on labor market outcomes. So we were, for example, doing some more work for Sweden on labor market outcomes. We are working on international comparisons. We have some plans to work on migrant families, so families who have migrated internationally. There is work going on how adversity in the sense of health shocks, job loss, bereavement, and what we have called cumulative adversity impact migration towards family, also loneliness. I'm doing some work in which I've matched survey data to register data, which can be interesting because, yeah, sometimes you know from the survey what people's motives are, but you don't know where the family members live, and that then comes from the register data. We are planning more methodological papers and synthesizing work, and in fact, we are now working on a special issue for the journal Population, Space and Place, which you might know, or I hope that many of you know the journal. And so we're trying to finish papers in a few days and then sending them out for review. If you think of other research that can be done, there are countries and regions for which there are register data that we haven't used that yet. So we're hoping to get a postdoc from Finland to work with us for a few months next year. There are interesting data for Andalusia that we hope we can use. You could do more international comparisons, look at international migration. And in fact, I've now two PhD students who work on family ties and international migration. They're not employed in the Family Ties project, but they're related. Yeah, it could be that new registered data will be available because countries are still working on making registered data available for researchers. More work using survey, and there's an example from Japan that we might use in some future. We might do some more work on sequences of migration or lifetime migration. And in fact, there's now a new IUSSP working group on lifetime migration that has just started. So we hope to collaborate in that working group. We could do more on regional or local differentiation, and also historical work could also be really interesting. And then I would like to mention future research that I hope to do, looking at how classmates and colleagues are influential to each other's migration behavior and also behavior in terms of other life events. So there's one planned project of a postdoc who will start to work with us in, I think it's May next year. And I have a proposal out to do work on classmates and colleagues. And I don't know the results of that proposal yet. And in that work, so in the planned work, we're going to do work with register data for the Netherlands on school classes and firms. And in the proposal, we also propose to do work on Sweden and Norway in this sense. We focus on young adults, and we hope to study not only migration, but also home ownership, leaving the parental home, union formation, fertility, and education events. It will also be possible to look at neighbors and at peers in military service, all using register data. And I know that for the UK, this is not really an option, but for many Nordic countries and the Netherlands, it is. So I already said something about the UK and register data. So I want to say a bit about data challenges and data opportunities. And I would first like to mention a few that are common to all migration research in the sense of micro work on individual migration, and a few challenges and opportunities that are specific to the role of family in migration. So if you look at data challenges that are applicable, in my view, to all micro research on migration and staying, is that, well, migration is a rare event. So yeah, maybe 1% a year migrate over longer distances. In some countries, it's more, but still, if you have data for only a short period, you need a very large N. And you need longitudinal information because you want to measure your explanatory variables before a potential moves. Another challenge is that motives for migration are in fact very hard to measure. So as I said, we did some work on motives for migration, but we also encountered quite a few methodological challenges, and we published a paper by Brian Gillespie, myself, and Casey Eggleston in Demographic Research, where we go into the specific challenges of measuring migration motives using open-ended survey questions. And motives for staying are even harder to measure, partly because of a lack of salience. If you ask people, why do you stay? Many haven't even thought about it. Why would I move? It's sort of like implicit motives for staying. And you can also ask the question, do people really have motives for staying, or is it constraints that prevent moving? So there haven't been many attempts to measure motives for staying. And in fact, one of the attempts that is available is a survey for Spain, in which both migrants and non-migrants internally, so internal migrants and non-migrants internally, have been asked what would keep them from moving. But even then, it's not so easy to interpret the answers, because for some people, this is really about wanting to move but not being able to, whereas for others, it's just not wanting to move. And then if you look at challenges specific to the role of the family, you need even greater numbers, because especially if you look at the beacon role of family, there are just not that many people who move towards family. If you would take a lifetime, it would be more than if you look at only a short time span. But typically we don't have lifetime data, so we need very large numbers. And another difficulty is that if you want to look at whether people move towards family members, you need their location information. And it is not that easy to ask in surveys about where all the family members live. It takes a lot of time. It's complex. And if you look at motives, you can ask, why did you move? And you can see that people move because they wanted to be close to family. But actually, that is not enough. You need actual locations. For example, if people do not mention the motive that they moved for family, is that because this is not applicable because they don't have family far away? Or do they have family, but they're not motivated to move towards them? So for this reason, we dismissed a data set that we planned to move in the beginning, a data set for New Zealand, which had a measurement of motives for staying, but we didn't know where the family members lived. So if you don't mention the motive, I don't want to leave my family behind. If you don't mention that, again, that could be because you don't have family living close by, or because they're not, you're not interested in remaining near them. So then finally, so what are the solutions? What are the best data that you can use to study migration in relation to family, and more specifically, migration towards family? So I mentioned register data a few times, and for Nordic countries in the Netherlands and increasingly also Belgium, register data are a good solution. But to be able to use register data, you need to have a population register, which is, of course, not available in every country. Another solution can be survey data or census matched to register data. That gives a lot of extra opportunities, because then you can also measure motives, for example. You need to have register data. So if you would look at data solutions for the UK, I would be curious to hear whether there are more options, but I would think that long-running panel surveys are feasible in some senses, especially if they run for a really long time so that they become multi-generational, or if they have a retrospective part so that you can follow people's migration histories, or you can look back at people's migration histories. And I have done work for the UK, and that showed that it works for the anchor role of family. There were questions in Understanding Society or UK HLS data about the locations of the family members, so we could see whether people were more likely to stay if they had family living close by. But I wouldn't be sure whether it's feasible to look at those data for the beacon role. We did some work in the Family Ties Project for the United States using the panel study of income dynamics, and there it was only just possible. While, as you might know, the PSID has been running for a long time, since 1968. So it is really multi-generational, and if there's one survey in the world that should be able to do it, that would be the PSID. So to come to a quick conclusion, well, non-resident family is important in migration, so it's important not only to look at labor market or education for migration, but also at non-resident family. And the other conclusion is that the data requirements are really huge and potentially prohibitive if you don't have access to register data. So I would like to thank you. This was my presentation, and I think I'll just stop sharing.